welcome everyone. My name is Maya Hargens. I am a career counselor at UC Santa Barbara, and I work closely with students interested in working in government. So who better to bring on to talk about working in government and federal government and the Department of State specifically, than to meet a really great alumni from UCSB who is currently in the Department of State, and also a recruiter who can share with you lots of great detail about the application process and who what they're looking for and what kind of positions and what qualifications there are. So I will go ahead and pass things off to Givi, and I am encouraging students to ask questions in the Q&A, and I will go ahead and present them as I see fit. We'll spend about the next 20 minutes or so hearing Givi's story, and then we will pass the torch to Jason, where we can hear more, see a presentation and learn more about the recruitment process. So off to you.
All right, thanks, Maya, and welcome everyone. I'm really excited to be here. I'm jealous that all of you are in Santa Barbara. I miss it more. The more I travel and the more places I see, the more I realize how unique of a place Santa Barbara is. So it's always good to be back, even though it's virtual this time. Okay, so my name is Givi, and I am a Foreign Service officer, and I have been in the department since 2018. And I just wanted to briefly talk about my journey sort of to the State Department, to the Foreign Service, and sort of share my story, just to highlight that there are many different ways to get to the Foreign Service, and just point out one sort of way that I went about it, and kind of what my story was. So when I started off at UC Santa Barbara, I was a poli-sci major and a French major, and so I've always known that I've wanted to do something kind of as an abstract concept, something related to foreign affairs, international relations, but wasn't really sure what. So that's kind of how I started my UCSB career. And then I heard about this study abroad opportunity that you could do, as a junior, and I did. I went abroad to study in Paris, France, for a year. That I think really sort of sparked my interest, and really sort of solidified it to pursue something relating to international affairs, and but still didn't know what exactly. During my study abroad, I met a lot of people from all over the world, some of whom I'm still friends with, and still keep in touch with. And so I sort of enjoyed meeting people from different countries with different backgrounds, different stories, and so that's kind of where I was. One thing I did know was that I wanted to study law. That was one of the reasons I was a poli-sci major, and I wanted to see if there was something I could do relating to international law, public service. And so when I graduated from UCSB, I went to law school, and within the first year applied to the US Navy's JAG Corps. That just so happened that a recruiter came to the law school and sort of highlighted that you could be in the military, you could be in public service, and also have opportunities to serve abroad, to practice international law, maritime law. That's kind of what appealed to me with the Navy. And so that's what I did. I graduated law school, didn't really think about the Foreign Service. I had heard of the Foreign Service, but didn't really know much about it. So it was kind of just always sort of in the back of my mind, but I wasn't too familiar with the program. So it's great that many of you are here and thinking about it now. I think earlier the better. I wish I had known about the Foreign Service when I was in college. So anyways, I graduated law school and went into the Navy as a JAG Corps officer, and got to do some interesting things. I was initially, my first year, the Navy makes everyone practice their litigation skills. So I was mainly in the courtroom, but after that, I was on a ship and deployed to the Gulf, and got to work on maritime law issues, international law issues, rules of engagement, different things. I was then assigned to Naples, Italy, and worked with NATO, so had that experience. And in fact, while I was stationed in Naples, Italy, I had a project that I worked on with the State Department, and then ended up following the invasion of Crimea by Russia. We had naval ships that went into the Black Sea, and I got to go, and I actually met the U.S. ambassador to Georgia, who invited me for dinner and actually asked me if I ever thought about the Foreign Service. And that was the first time that I sort of really considered pursuing this career. I went back that evening and actually registered for the Foreign Service exam. And then, it was kind of a process, and I was still on active duty. So it took me a while to get off active duty, but eventually I did, and I joined the Foreign Service. So that was sort of my path. Didn't happen until I was in the Navy for 7 years. So basically not until close to about 10 years since graduating from UCSB did I join the Foreign Service. So just to highlight that, it's not something that you can do it, early on. You can do it mid-career, and you can do it late career. In my orientation, Foreign Service orientation course that we call A100, which is the initial training, we had 80 students, and they ranged from recent graduates all the way to people in late careers. So a whole range. And in fact, there were 2 of us from UC Santa Barbara. And so again, just to highlight that there are people from all walks of life, different parts of the country, different universities, different experience levels. And like I said, 2 of us from UC Santa Barbara. And he's now serving in Russia for his second tour. So I just completed a tour in Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates, where I was a consular officer there. And for those of you that may not be familiar, consular officers have several missions abroad, one of which is to interview potential visitors that want to come to the US, and to make determinations and adjudications on their applications through the interview. And what's neat about a career in the State Department is that the State Department actually sends you to language school to learn a foreign language. So I did about a year of training in the DC area before I went abroad, part of which included Arabic. And so I conducted many interviews in Arabic in the UAE. And fortunately, I got there about 6 months prior to COVID, and so we were still at that point seeing a lot of travel to the U.S. And it's a great opportunity to practice your language skills, to improve your language skills, to learn about the local population just by interviewing people from all segments of the public. And so that's what I was doing. And then another mission that we have is helping Americans abroad, whether that's Americans that may have issues with the police or the law, or may get arrested, or Americans that may be stranded or destitute, or an American that may have lost a passport or be a victim of domestic violence. And so once COVID started, a lot of our operations and the embassy shifted to that particular mission, which was to help Americans get home. We organized one repatriation flight. A lot of my colleagues in other embassies had to do a lot more. Fortunately for us, the UAE government reopened flights fairly quickly, so we only had to do one repatriation flight back to get Americans home. But then, with COVID and most of the offices being closed in the embassy, we had a huge sort of backlog of Americans wanting to renew their passports or get back home, and so there was a big effort to help Americans abroad. So that was another very sort of meaningful and interesting mission that consular officers do abroad. And then another important mission, which I didn't get to work on, is interviewing applicants for immigrant visas, those that want to immigrate to the US. And as sort of the one of the designated posts for Iran, since we don't have an embassy in Iran, we interviewed a lot of Iranians that are coming to the US that want to immigrate, and the consular officers that did those interviews had received Farsi training. So it was definitely an interesting place to be. And then also we got to work on some of the more sort of strategic issues that came up, in the UAE and in the region. And so, for example, I got to be the coordinating officer for a new strategic dialogue between the United States and the UAE. The ambassador wanted to sort of come up with a strategic plan that would deepen our relations with the UAE and look forward, down the road for 10 years, and come up with a framework and what that might look like. So I got this opportunity to sort of be the coordinating officer and sort of take inputs from all the different agencies that are at a U.S. embassy abroad, as well as working with the National Security Council back in DC and coming up with this new strategic dialogue. We then, submitted our proposal to the Emirati authorities and the Emirati government, and they liked our ideas, and we were able to launch this new strategic dialogue with the UAE. So that was something that I thought was a very interesting opportunity that I got to work on. That was sort of outside of my normal day-to-day duties as a consular officer. And then we had a lot of what we call VIPs, or senior government officials from the US that came to the region. And so just setting up meetings, working as what we call control officers, essentially helping set up their visits and making sure that their meetings with the Emirati government officials went well. And so worked on those types of issues. And we have different tracks in the Foreign Service, which I think Jason will talk about, one of which is political, and I'm a political officer. And so I also got an opportunity to work a little bit in the political section. And so, just on various issues, I think the one that probably everyone's heard of is the Abraham Accords. We had the U.S. sort of led framework between the UAE and Israel that sort of established relations, including economic and political relations between the two countries. So that was kind of a historic initiative, and I got to work on that a little bit, which was pretty interesting. And so, my next tour will be in Tbilisi, Georgia, and I will be in the political section there. Even though I will miss my consular experience, they say in the Foreign Service that you have the best stories during your consular tour, and that I think is true. So that's been my experience in the Foreign Service so far, and I'm happy to take questions, either through the Q&A now or at the end of the presentations. But it's definitely been a really rewarding experience for me and my family. I do have, I'm married, I have 2 children, and the Foreign Service has allowed our family to live abroad. My kids to experience foreign cultures at a pretty young and early age, to go to schools with students from other countries, and the opportunity to travel. We obviously COVID changed a lot of things, but before the COVID restrictions, we got to travel. We got to experience the region. We drove to Oman. We flew to Europe. We went to Italy. We went to Greece. Went to different places. Went to Turkey, and so just the opportunity and the experience of sort of living and working abroad. Doing something that is meaningful while also enjoyable and rewarding, I think, is what the State Department offers. So highly recommend it to anyone who may be interested, and good luck, and happy to take any questions.
I have a few questions for you. You
Great.
mentioned that you went to law school, and I know you did the JAG
Yes.
program, so maybe law school debt wasn't as big of a concern. I don't know. But I want to know, do you feel like your law school education was necessary for what you do now, or how does that tie into you working in the Department of State, your law school education?
Sure. No, that's a great question. Obviously, I'm not a lawyer now in the State Department. I practiced law in the Navy for 7 years, but in the Foreign Service, we don't have lawyers, and I think Jason can talk about that. But I don't necessarily think it's something that's a requirement. It's definitely not a requirement. For me, it sort of that's just my path to where I am now. It gave me the experiences, of living and working abroad, of sort of the analytical skills that law school teaches you, but you can get that in other ways. So it's not a requirement at all. But for me, that was just how I got to where I am now, and I definitely don't regret going to law school. It was also a great experience. I again developed lots of relationships. It definitely helps you become a good writer, and that's something that is important in the State Department. We write a lot of cables that we send back to DC, and I think having a legal education definitely helps. I've met many Foreign Service officers who do have law degrees, and many that don't. So it's definitely not something that's a requirement at all, but it was something that worked for me.
Can you share with us a little bit about your experience at UCSB and what some of your favorite classes were, or any research that you did, or anything that you just kind of, I know you're remembering the area and really appreciating Santa Barbara, probably even more now that you're away.
Yeah, definitely.
What did your UCSB education kind of, what have you moved forward with?
Happy to share my experience. So like I said, the study abroad year was great. I really enjoyed that, meeting people. I also played rugby at UC Santa Barbara, and I still have friends from the team. A couple of us went to Japan in 2019 for the Rugby World Cup. So I still, I think that was another highlight of my time at UC Santa Barbara. In terms of my education, I thought it was excellent. I was a double major in political science and French. I thought the teachers were great. I got to do a senior honors thesis where I sort of tied those two together. I focused on the European Union at the time and its potential for enlargement. And I wrote the thesis in French, but it was a political science themed. So it was kind of neat that I was able to combine that. So yeah, overall, it was a great experience. Still have friends from UC Santa Barbara, and I took my wife there when we were living in San Diego, and she was like, "What? You went to school here?" She couldn't believe it. So I always love to come back and visit.
What would you tell our students, or what would you suggest our students could do now while they're in school to help prepare them for a potential career in the Department of State?
So I think everyone who's at this call has definitely taken the first step. Obviously, learning about it and sort of going to these types of events is important, just to know that these opportunities do exist. And I know that Jason can talk about the various, whether it's internships or fellowships or different sort of opportunities that the department has. But I think that's definitely an important step. I think just, sort of really, understanding that you can do this at any point in your career. Doesn't have to be, there shouldn't be any pressure that you need to necessarily come out and, get into the Foreign Service right away. So I would just sort of make the best of your college experience, be open-minded. One thing I would recommend is if there's an opportunity to study abroad or to get some international exposure, I think that is always helpful, and it makes, your candidacy stronger. So look for opportunities that might give you that. And I don't think that's a requirement that you have to have, international experiences, but I think it definitely helps with the Foreign Service. So that would be my advice: is try to study abroad, try to, travel, try to, go and meet some of the international students. One of my best friends from UCSB was an Italian international student that studied abroad for a semester, and we still keep in touch. So.
We had a couple questions that came through. Can working for the State Department segue into a political career?
It probably can. I just like working for any government agency. There are a lot of former government officials that go into politics. That's not, why I joined the State Department, but I know that definitely can, definitely, but it's not something, it's not a requirement for politics. Obviously, you have politicians that come from, private industry, from, academia, from different walks of life. So Yes, in the sense that you definitely sort of get a sense of understanding how U.S. government works, but I don't think it's a requirement. So hopefully that answers your question.
I have a couple other questions I think will be best. I'll save those for Jason. But another question is for you, Givi, is what is a piece of advice you would give to someone who's interested in law school and or the Foreign Service? I think you kind of answered that, but
yeah, sure. Well, I would try to think about what your goals might be. If you want to practice law, I think the legal profession is an excellent profession. It's an honorable profession. It was rewarding for me, when I practiced law. So I would encourage anyone that's interested in that. I wouldn't go to law school just to then go into the Foreign Service. I think that's, you won't have a good experience in law school, because a lot of law school is not, international law and sort of international relations. It's a lot of, property law and a lot of wills and trusts and very things that have nothing to do with the Foreign Service. And so if you're truly interested in becoming a lawyer and practicing for a while, then yeah, I think that's a great thing to do. If you're interested in international law, yes, go practice, be a lawyer, and then look at the Foreign Service kind of mid-career, like what I did. After 6-7 years, I sort of switched. So I think you can definitely do both, but I wouldn't do one for the other. I think if you truly are interested in both, then yes, definitely.
I agree. As a career counselor who works with a lot of law students, we say go to law school because you want to be a lawyer and not for any other careers. Jason is nodding his head. So if it so happens that you segue into a career like yours in the State Department, great. And I know the JAG program helps pay for law school, because otherwise you're left with law school debt in a career that may not always afford your law school loans. I'm trying to put that really politely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, definitely, if anyone's interested in the JAG Corps, feel free to email me. I think you're going to put my email or give my email out. So happy to talk about that, offline. I know they're all varied. I think the Navy pays for basically half of the law school. I think maybe the other services pay for all of it, but it's definitely a great program. So happy to talk about that offline.
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, and you're not just getting a law school education for 50% off, you're definitely dedicating yourself to the military in that way, in some ways. So a couple more questions and then we will segue to Jason, but do you have any say when it comes to the places you get assigned to in the Foreign Service?
Yes and no. So I think, and Jason can also answer this, but I think maybe the more senior you get, the maybe more of a say you have, at least maybe up to a certain level. But your first tour, you got, like I said, there were 80 of us in my class, and we got a list with 80 positions throughout the world, and we were asked to rank all 80, our high choices, our medium choices, and our low choices. So you really have to be sort of ready and willing to go wherever the department sends you. For the second tour bidding, I felt like there was a little bit more of a choice. The list had like about 100 or so jobs, and we were only asked to put down 10. So I felt like there was definitely a lot more, that gave us a lot more choice for our second tour. We call bidding, or the assignments process. And from looking at my sort of where I got assigned and my classmates, I think the sort of our career development officers do take into account, your family situations, some of your interests. Obviously nothing's a guarantee, but I felt like for the most part, everybody was pretty happy with their assignments. So I think they take that into account, but with that being said, you have to be ready to go wherever the department sends you. And I think that's true later on in your career too, but I just feel like maybe you have a little bit more of a say later on.
You mentioned that you speak French and that you learned Arabic. Do you know any other languages, and do you feel like your language background has helped you in your role?
That's a good question. So the foreign language is not a requirement to join the Foreign Service. I I learned French sort of in schools and then at UCSB and the study abroad. I also grew up speaking Georgian at home. My parents are Georgian immigrants. And so I'm looking forward to actually getting assigned there and living there and sort of exposing my family to, our roots, I guess. And then I studied Arabic with the Foreign Service. There were definitely a lot of my classmates who didn't have a foreign language, and the State Department will definitely send you to language training. I believe it's a requirement to be tenured in the Foreign Service. And so if you don't speak a foreign language, you're almost guaranteed to go to a place that that requires you to basically have a foreign language. So yes, having a foreign language helps. I think in the application process, you can test and potentially boost your score if you speak a foreign language at a certain level, and maybe Jason can talk about that. And so yes, I think it is helpful, but it's also just, besides just getting hired, I think it's also helpful. It gives you opportunities to, apply to different jobs. In fact, one of the reasons I think I got my next assignment, I did what's called out-year bidding, which is applying a year early for an assignment because you already have the language and you don't need to go through the language training. I actually went through that. And so, yeah, to answer your question, I think it's helpful, but it's definitely not something that, you absolutely must have.
Thank you. One last question, and then we'll pass the torch to Jason. Can you tell us the best and most challenging parts of being you in this role?
Okay, so the challenging parts, I think they're kind of related. So the challenging part is the constant moving. So I combined with my military career, where I moved several times and deployed to the Middle East, and then since joining the department, wherever you are, they move you to the DC area, and you might be here for about a year, and then you move up, for your tour assignment, and then you come back. So the constant moving and packing up, that's definitely been the most challenging. But at the same time, all the moves have also been the most rewarding. So every time I've gotten to move somewhere, whether it was Italy, whether it was to the UAE, whether even here in DC, this is my first time living in DC when I first moved here to join the Foreign Service. They've all been wonderful experiences and met new people and developed relationships and had new experiences. So I would say that the moves are both the most challenging as well as the most rewarding experiences of the Foreign Service.
Thank you. So you'll stay on during Jason's chat with us?
Yeah, absolutely.
And,
if there are any other questions that might come up, I'll be here.
So I am going to remove Spotlight, and then Jason, it's your turn here. There you are. So I'd like to welcome Jason, who is a recruiter for the Department of State, and you'll share with us. I think a lot of the questions that have been asked will be answered, so I'm not going to answer them yet until you're done.
Okay, thanks a lot, Maya, and thanks, Givi, for your great presentation and being willing to do this event. I'm glad to have a chance to chat with you all, although it would be nice to do it in person at some point, but at least this way we can bring in an alumnus of UC Santa Barbara. I am also a Foreign Service officer. I've been in for 17.5 years, and I'm now the diplomat in residence for Southern California, which basically means I'm the recruiter. So I have served overseas in Kingston, Jamaica, Hong Kong, and Tijuana, Mexico. And I've also had several assignments in Washington, D.C., focused on things like Chilean affairs, the United Nations, and labor issues. I've been in this position now for about 1 year. So I do have a presentation, which I'm going to go ahead and share. So let me do that. Okay. So, all right. So I'm going to talk both about careers and then some student programs at the Department of State. I'm going to talk about the careers first, because by talking about the careers, then the internships and the fellowship programs will make a little bit more sense because they lead to these particular careers. I will mention, you can see in the bottom of the slide, there's both the careers.state.gov website, which has a lot of the information I'm going to share with you today, but also on the bottom right-hand side, you may be able to see it. I don't know if it's how readable it is, but for all the programs I'm going to be talking today, U.S. citizenship is required. If you are a legal permanent resident, I'm happy to talk to you. But it will, you can't apply for any of the things I'm talking about today until you take the oath of naturalization. I do know people who've applied for various programs on the day they take the oath. So to start out, and some of this has been referenced already, the Department of State, our employment is basically split into two types, civil service and foreign service. Civil service for the Department of State, we're actually one of the smaller federal agencies, and within the US, we don't have a very large footprint. We're mostly in Washington, DC for our civil service positions, although we do have passport agencies and some other offices around the country. For the civil service, it's like applying for a job at Veterans Affairs or Department of Commerce or some other federal agency. You see a job on USA Jobs, a specific job in a specific location for a specific salary, and if you meet their qualifications, you can apply. And that's basically, then you can stay in that job as long as it continues to exist, and you have adequate performance. The Foreign Service, and Givi's already talked about this to a degree, you don't know exactly where you're going to go and what you're going to do. And in the Foreign Service, typically you're moving every 2 to 3 years. And traditionally you would spend probably half to 2/3 of your career overseas. As Givi said, that's a lot of moves. We do have a maximum age of 59 for the Foreign Service, although it's 64 for veterans. And Diplomatic Security Special Agent, which is our law enforcement position, has a maximum age of 36. So the Foreign Service is in a couple of different categories, and Givi's talked about the Foreign Service Officer, but I want to talk now about the Foreign Service Specialist. These are 19 different jobs in various careers that require either a particular academic or work experience background or both. So I'm going to highlight a couple of them in the various categories that you see here. Information Management Specialist is the position where you're in charge of the IT infrastructure at our embassies and consulates around the world. This position is one of them that is always open. For our Foreign Service Specialist careers, not all of them are open all the time. Some of them may only open once a year, but several of them will open a couple of times a year, or a few are open every day. And this one, you take a test that's online, and then you go through the other steps in the process. I won't spend much time on that, so we can get to the Q&A. But if you have particular questions about the various steps in the process, I'm happy to go into that as well. The other position that's open all the time is our Office Management Specialist position. This position is an administrative assistant position. If you have a bachelor's degree, it does require 1 year of experience supporting a senior staff, like at a company or something like that. And then also has an exam, which is offered throughout the year. The other position I did want to highlight that's been open almost all year and is open right now is one of our engineering positions. That's Security Engineering Officer. That's where you're in charge of the physical security features of our embassies and consulates around the world. This is open for anybody in any engineering field once you get your bachelor's degree. Now, Foreign Service Officer, Givi talked a bit about this. There are the various career tracks. Sometimes you'll hear them referred to as cones. To become a Foreign Service Officer, the first step is signing up for the test. The Foreign Service Officer test is offered in February, June, and October. When you register for the test, you have to submit several essays called personal narratives, and you also do have to pick a career track. However, it's not uncommon to work outside of your career track, and I've worked in 4 of the 5 myself. So consular, you're doing the visa interviews and helping American citizens overseas, like what Givi was doing in Abu Dhabi. Economic, you're doing analyses of economic conditions in a country. That also includes environmental and energy issues. Management, basically making sure that the buildings that we have meet occupational safety and health standards, that we have adequate housing, because we do provide housing when you're overseas. The motor pool is operating correctly. The human resources function, we have adequate money, all that kind of stuff. Political officers, of which I am one, you're writing reports on political conditions in the country. And the public diplomacy officers are in charge of the embassy website, dealing with the press and organizing cultural exchanges. We have one other opportunity in the Foreign Service called the Consular Fellows Program. This is a non-career opportunity, which means it's for a maximum of 5 years. During those 5 years, you will probably have 2 assignments where you do consular work, similar to that of an entry-level Foreign Service officer. So that's visa interviews and helping American citizens. This is our only program where you must speak a language. So you have to speak Arabic, Chinese, Portuguese, or Spanish. As Givi mentioned, for Foreign Service Officer and Foreign Service Specialist, language is not required. and foreign service officer, actually no degree is required at all. Doesn't matter if you have one or not, as long as you're a U.S. citizen age 20, although 97% of foreign service officers do have a bachelor's degree. But you can get extra points in the process depending on the languages you speak. I put a link in the chat earlier about the different languages and the levels required to get those extra points. Now, I mentioned at the beginning about the civil service, and I'm happy to go into more details on this if anyone has questions, but I did want to flag the Pathways program. If you're thinking about the civil service, whether for the Department of State or anybody else in the federal government, I would encourage you to think about Pathways. Pathways internships at the Department of State are paid internships that typically take place during the summer and breaks, like spring break or something like that. If you get enough hours, basically you can move directly into a civil service position without applying, without having to go through the regular application process on USA Jobs, which is a great benefit. Because as you probably know, civil service positions, we get a lot of applicants. So anything that can help you with that is a positive. Similarly, the Pathways Recent Graduates program is helpful if you're thinking about federal employment. Again, the Department of State has opportunities, but because we're as I mentioned earlier, a fairly small agency, we don't have as many as some other agencies. The Pathways Recent Graduates is open to those who've received an associate's, a bachelor's, a master's, or a doctoral degree within the past 2 years. So you basically have a 2-year window to apply for these positions. And that means that they're reducing the competition because you are only competing against similar recent graduates. Now, Givi is a veteran, as he mentioned. We do give you extra points in both the civil service and foreign service selection processes if you're a veteran. And if anybody has any questions about issues for veterans, I'm happy to answer them, or maybe Givi can too. Now, I did want to talk about a couple of our fellowships. We have the Foreign Affairs IT Fellowship, which pays up to $37,500 a year in tuition fees and living expenses for undergraduate and graduate students in IT-related fields. And because we paid all this money, then you have a 5-year service commitment as an information management specialist. You may recall that's the foreign service specialist position I mentioned earlier, where you're in charge of the IT infrastructure at our embassies and consulates around the world. To be, this can be for either your junior and senior year. So if you're a sophomore now and thinking about, studying IT and want a way to pay for it, this would be one way to do that. Or if you're thinking about going to grad school, you can either apply as a senior, or if you're going out in the workforce for a few years and want to get a master's degree later, it could be in cybersecurity or computer science, management information systems, something like that. The application deadline for fall of 2022 is January 31st of 2022, and the deadlines are typically in January if you're thinking about a future year. We also have the Wrangell and Pickering Graduate Fellowships. These are fellowships that pay up to $42,000 a year for a 2-year master's degree in a field relevant to the foreign service. So that could be an MBA, it could be a master's degree in economics, public administration, international affairs, something like that. And then you have a 5-year service commitment as a foreign service officer, so someone like myself or Givi. These are very competitive programs, and the application deadlines are typically in mid-September. They were a few weeks ago. Now, we also have 2 fellowships in the civil service side. These are across the whole federal government, not just the Department of State, but they are ways to come work at the Department of State. The Presidential Management Fellowship, this is for those who, both of these fellowships, I should say, are for people who have a master's degree or a doctoral degree. And within 2 years of it, you can apply for the Presidential Management Fellowship, or even a little bit before you get the master's degree or doctoral degree. And then it leads to a 2-year paid program where you get to explore basically within one agency or possibly within a couple of agencies. The deadline passed just about a week ago, but it's every October. And then the Veterans Innovation Partnership Fellowship, this is very similar to the Presidential Management Fellowship, except it's only for 1 year. And the paid program is just for 1 year to explore the agency or a couple of agencies. And then, as the name suggests, it's only for veterans. The deadline is actually October 21st. So if you are eligible for this fellowship and want to try to apply, you could still potentially get it together. I also wanted to mention that there's the English for Heritage Language Speakers program. This is a program that leads to an 8-month paid program in Washington, D.C., and then you have to serve in the federal government for 1 year. It's open to native speakers of the languages you see on the slide and those who have a bachelor's degree. The application period is March to July each year. Now, I mentioned the Pathways Internship Program. We have a couple of other internship programs too that I'll mention now quickly as well. The Virtual Student Federal Service is a virtual program. It's been going on for many, many years. It is our fastest selection process because it does not you do not get a security clearance, which can take some time. It is unpaid, but it's only for up to 10 hours a week. So it's not a big time commitment. And you work on projects between September and May. The application deadline will be the end of July. I have several VSFS interns myself putting together things like this presentation. Our paid internship program for undergraduates is the U.S. Foreign Service Internship Program. This is for rising sophomores and juniors. The deadline was in late August. And it's basically you apply about a year in advance because of the fact that it's very competitive, and also because we want to make sure you get through the clearance process, because you will go on to do paid internships both in Washington, D.C. and overseas. Our largest internship program is an unpaid program called the Student Internship Program. This is offered for both undergraduate and graduate students during the fall, spring, and summer. The application deadlines are typically 6 to 9 months in advance. The application deadline for summer 2022 was a few days ago. It's already closed. Probably for fall of 2022, it'll open at the end of December or maybe in January of next year. That's again to give us time to do the security clearance. There are opportunities in Washington, D.C. and around the world, but I would flag that there are some in Southern California. The Office of Foreign Missions in Los Angeles, which deals with foreign consulates in the Los Angeles area, sometimes has opportunities, as do the offices of diplomatic security in San Francisco and Tucson. But as I mentioned earlier, I served in Tijuana, and when I was there, we never had enough applicants for our positions. And in Tijuana and many places outside of Western Europe, we were able to provide housing. So that's one way to help reduce your costs, even though it is an unpaid internship.
Jason, can
there are
I
also some
interrupt you
ways
for a
to pay.
second?
Sure.
We had a question. I don't know if you're familiar with our UCDC program at UCSB, where folks apply to get to UCDC and then they have housing in Washington, D.C. Would that work with one of the State Department internships?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you find housing through the university or through some other means, that's certainly fine. You know, that's great.
Okay.
If you can
Thank
do
you.
that. Sure. I'll just mention that there is also the Gilman Scholarship. If you're a federal Pell Grant recipient and an undergraduate student, you're eligible to apply for this for either studying or interning abroad. So if you wanted to do an overseas internship through our student internship program, but weren't sure how to pay for it, this might be one way to do it. They give out about 3,000 of these each year, and it just depends on when you're planning to go overseas. You can see the deadlines here on the slide. There are also scholarships for London, Paris, and Washington, D.C. that you can apply for. Basically, the main thing to know about these is when you apply for an internship in one of those locations, you'll want to indicate that you're okay with the Department of State sharing your information with the organizations that administer these scholarship programs. There are also other ways to get overseas. As Givi mentioned, it's great to have overseas experience, and also learning languages is a big plus. The Critical Language Scholarship will help you learn a language or improve your language skills. Those in purple are ones where you need to have some background, but those in black text, you don't need to. You can apply as an undergraduate or graduate student, even as a senior. This is one of our few programs that does not have a GPA requirement, and the application deadline is November 16th. The Bourne Awards, similarly, will pay you for study abroad or research abroad in regions critical to U.S. interests. If you go to bourneawards.org, you'll see what those regions are. The deadline for these programs, there's one for graduates and one for undergraduates, is late January or early February. We also have two programs designed to expose you to what a career in foreign policy is all about. One of them is the Wrangle Summer Enrichment Program. This is a 6-week program hosted by Howard University that includes travel, room and board, and a $3,200 stipend. This is open to undergraduates only, but includes graduating seniors. During those 6 weeks, you'll meet with Department of State officials, with staff of members of Congress, visit some different locations around DC, meet with non-governmental organizations, basically learn how foreign policy works. The application deadline for this will be in early February. And then our last program, which is actually going on this week, is the Cox State Department Diplomacy Seminar, which is similar to the Summer Enrichment Program. It's basically compressed into 1 week. This year it's being done remotely, and last year it was too, but we do hope in the future it will be back in person. It is in October every year, and the application deadline is in late August. This is me. I am very active on Facebook. I do a lot of interviews of department employees about their jobs. So, I'm happy to talk to you today, of course, and answer your questions. But if you want to really hear about, detailed information about what it's like to serve as a information management specialist or an office management specialist, if you go to DIR SoCal on Facebook, you'll see a lot of those videos from over the last year. I'm actually doing one tomorrow on careers in multilateral diplomacy, since Friday is UN Day. And then in the yellow text in the red box, you'll see a tiny URL, which I'll post in the chat too. And that tiny URL, if you go there, you can register to receive updates on Department of State careers. And I will also share through that a monthly newsletter, which will include information on how to reach me by email, which I'm happy to answer questions you may have by email, but also has information on my office hours. And you can get in touch with me to set up an appointment for office hours as well. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, and I'll be happy to answer whatever questions there may be.
I think some of the remaining questions that came through from the Q&A live was what the Foreign Service exam is like, and then what the requirements and the process of being hired. Also, someone's asking if we can share your slides.
Sure, I'll send them to you, Maya, after this. Okay. And I just put the tiny URL in there, and I'll be putting some other links too while we're chatting. But so the Foreign Service Officer Test is a comprehensive test, right? I mean, it's, sometimes people think, well, it'll only be based on like geography and history of diplomacy or something, but that's not the case. It includes math, it includes, economic issues, basically anything that you would have to do as a Foreign Service officer, we try to put that on there. So there is a practice test, which I would encourage you to take if you'd like. And then there's also a reading list, which I'll put the reading list link here as well. That reading list was recently updated and has a lot of books and things like that we would recommend, including, I would say, keeping up on current affairs is very important. So, reading something like The Economist or the Financial Times or Wall Street Journal, New York Times, to keep up on with what's going on in the world, I would certainly recommend that. But it is a difficult exam. I don't want to, understate that. So just prepare yourself, but at the same time, don't be discouraged if you don't pass it the first time. No one cares once you join how many times it took you to pass the test. We recently had someone who joined who'd taken it 9 times. That's probably the highest I've ever heard of, but most of the people I know in the Foreign Service, I have no idea how many times they took it. Nobody cares once you're in. So, don't feel bad if you don't pass it the first time. That's not uncommon. But when you take the practice exam, it'll tell you where you need to improve. So focus on that, because that's where you need to do a little bit better job. So that way you're ready.
How competitive is the process to be hired as a Foreign Service officer, or to get into Foreign Service?
I'm sorry, you broke up there for a second.
How competitive is the process to be hired? Right.
So it is competitive. I mean, we don't give out the exact percentages here because it does change over time. And like the passing score on the Foreign Service Officer Test will change based on how many people we need to bring in, for example. But it's also true, and I should have mentioned this earlier, that the Foreign Service processes generally take about a year to 18 months, whether you're thinking about Foreign Service Officer or one of the Foreign Service Specialist careers. So, we do have people who things happen in their life and they have to, drop out for whatever reason, right? The test is free, by the way, I should say, as long as you show up. You have to pay a small reservation fee just to make sure that you do come. I wouldn't let that discourage you. Just because, yes, there definitely is, there's definitely sort of a funnel here in the sense that, a lot of people take the test and the number of people actually join is significantly smaller, but, don't let that discourage you from the Foreign Service Officer. That's for Foreign Service Officer. For Foreign Service Specialist, I would mention for Information Management Specialist, we do not have enough people in the pipeline. Office Management Specialist also, we do not have enough people in the pipeline. We definitely are looking for more. That's why those tests are available all the time. Because we need more people there. So I know most people, when they're thinking about diplomacy, are probably most interested in being a Foreign Service Officer, and that's great. If that's what you're interested in, that's what you should apply for. It's not easy to change. But, if you are interested in some of the Foreign Service Specialist careers and you qualify for them, I would strongly urge you to apply for those as well.
You've addressed this pretty well, both you and throughout the whole presentation today, but it sounds like languages are beneficial but not required. Some positions are more benefited by having languages, and that there's also the opportunity to learn more languages.
Yes, I would just note that, you know, as Givi alluded to, you do have to learn a language in your first 5 years if you don't already have one. But the department, you know, that's one of the things, as he was saying, it's kind of a guided process for your first 2 assignments. They'll make sure, you know, like I had colleagues who went to Tijuana, and then, you know, maybe their Spanish still wasn't quite good enough. So then they went on to another Spanish speaking post so they would get even more exposure to Spanish. So that way they could pass the Spanish test at the language at the level that's required. So there's a lot of effort to make sure that you can meet those, meet that requirement. So, you know, and as I said, you do, and I put the link in there earlier, you do get extra points for having a language, but it's not a must. I would say though, if you have a chance, whether it's study abroad or some language courses or something like that, getting a language is certainly going to help you. I mean, my own situation ended up being somewhat similar to Givi's. I came in with Mandarin, and then there was an opportunity to take a Mandarin to Cantonese conversion course, and that's why I got to go to Hong Kong, because I was in a position where I could take a 4-month course like that. So, you know, it can help you in your career if you want to go to the place where the language is or where a similar language might be.
Thank you. Can we talk about security clearance and what sort of things are folks looking for in the security clearance? Are there any like deal breakers that can show up in a security clearance? And then I want to make sure that we talk about citizenship again just before we leave today, because I think that's coming up a lot.
Sure. So the security clearance process is an individualized process. So it's not like we can, you know, give you a list of, say, like, you know, here's the things that you must do. But basically the kind of the general rule of thumb is follow the law. And the key thing here is federal law, right? So the one that often comes up is marijuana, right? Still illegal at the federal level, even though it's legal in California for recreational use. So if you've ever used it in the past, it kind of, you know, it's hard to say, right? I mean, that may or may not be an issue. I definitely know people who've gotten through the security clearance who've used it in the past. But I would say once you start the process, don't use it. Even though it's legal in California, since it's not legal at the federal level, you don't want to have it, you know, something that you're using while you're going through the application process. So that's the most common one. But, you know, generally speaking, I would say the further back in time things are, the less of an issue they will probably be. But every case is different, and you'll meet, you know, if you get through the whole process, one of the last steps is the security clearance. So when you are meeting with the diplomatic security person, basically the key there is being open and honest, and then they'll let you know, you know, you'll get information from them. So that's, you know, that comes up kind of towards the end of the process there. And then on citizenship, yeah, just to reiterate, for all the programs I talked about today, you must be a U.S. citizen. Although, as I said, I'm happy to talk to you if you're close, if you're a legal permanent resident and you're going to be getting citizenship relatively soon. I do know people who have applied for our programs the same day that they took the oath of naturalization, and that's fine. If you're a naturalized citizen, that's great. I saw there was some question in the chat before about, you know, what if you're from a former Soviet country? No problem. In fact, one of my first colleagues had been in the Red Army, and then immigrated to the U.S. So, you know, I mean, I can't say that would be okay in every circumstance, but in his case, it wasn't a bar. So, you know, naturalized citizen is fine, absolutely. And I would also say along these same lines, if you have more than one citizenship, that's no bar on applying. It's possible you could be asked to renounce your other citizenship, or it's possible that you might get an assignment restriction that wouldn't allow you to serve in the country. But that's something that's determined on an individual basis as part of the security clearance process.
We have another minute or two if anyone else has any other questions.
And I don't know if Givi has anything to add on anything I said. I know I've been talking a lot here.
Givi, anything you want to share as we wrap up today?
No, that was really insightful, Jason. Thanks. We also had some interns in Abu Dhabi, so that was great. I think it was really enriching and rewarding for them to be there. And I know that a lot of the foreign service families will host interns, so sometimes you're able to get free housing that way. So that's just something that jumped out at me. So yeah, and as Jason said, definitely, there are people who've naturalized. So I'm a naturalized U.S. citizen as well. When my parents moved, I was little, so I ended up, so I'm in the foreign service. So that's definitely not a bar.
Thank you.
Both to the foreign service or to the U.S. military. So
I guess we'll take one last question, and I think this might be a little bit of a broad question, but we'll try for it. The best program to apply for someone graduating this year. So it's October. I imagine that means that they are graduating in June of 2022. Jason.
For the civil service, absolutely the Pathways Recent Graduates Program. I mean, that, if you qualify for other things on USA Jobs, please go ahead and apply for them, even if they're not specifically Pathways Recent Graduates. But as I mentioned, Pathways Recent Graduates is a great way to have the competition reduced to those who graduated within the last 2 years. And I would also mention that if you're thinking about a civil service career, so a position within the Department of State, or within the federal government, a lot of it is just getting your foot in the door somewhere, because once you have that civil service status, it's much easier to change agencies. And it's not uncommon to see people at the Department of State in the civil service who previously worked at, Department of Labor or Department of Commerce or some other agency. So, you might want to consider, if you can get on through Pathways, you might want to consider even other agencies, especially because Department of State doesn't have so many positions, because then you'll have that preference of being a civil service employee already when you're applying for positions in the Department of State. So I always encourage people, if you really want to work in the civil service, focus on the Pathways Recent Graduates. On the foreign service, we don't really have a particular program. And it's not uncommon for foreign service officers to have, kind of like what both Givi and I had, like 7 to 10 years of experience. I came in with about 10 years of experience. Sounds like Givi had about 7 years, I think he said, in the military. That's not uncommon. So we don't take a ton of people straight out of undergrad. We take a few more out of grad school, so that maybe would be a thing to think about, the Pickering or Wrangell fellowship programs. But maybe also think about something like Consular Fellows, which is going to be, as I said, if you speak one of the 4 languages there, or some of the foreign service specialist positions. Some of those we do take, more people straight out of an undergrad position, especially for information management specialists. So, but by the same token, as I was saying earlier, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try. If you're interested in the foreign service officer test, okay, maybe you'll pass the test, but you won't make it through the other steps of the process. But there's no harm in having gone through that process. At the very least, you're learning more about it. So, just get some of that international experience in some way if you can. Or get some government experience. I came from the U.S. Department of Labor. I was a civil service employee for 6 years before taking the Foreign Service Officer test. And, so something like that will be useful too. But Fulbright, Peace Corps, those are all really useful experiences to have if you can have some kind of an international experience along the way, and maybe be trying for these various foreign service programs at the same time.
Thank you. I'm going to wrap things up because I know that students will need to go to class and you two have more work to do. I will be finishing up this video, and then I will, once it's edited a little bit, I'll send it out to the folks who were part of this. But I want to thank you two so much. I learned a lot. I hope our students learned a lot. We had just over 20 students here participating and asking really great questions. So you two gave a really strong perspective of the Department of State, both from the experience that you both have lived and then also how to get involved. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, I know UCSB and Career Services and all our students appreciate the two of you, and I'm sure students will be in touch. I've passed on your email addresses, and again, I appreciate your time. Bye, everyone. Thank you for participating.